Hey guys, how's it going? Today I'm going to be talking about 2020's Extraction starring Chris Hemsworth. Okay, so yesterday I watched Chris Hemsworth's new Netflix film Extraction. This came out on April 24th. It was directed by Sam Hargrave, who this is actually his first major directing job. He's directed a couple other shorts, but he's got like a 20-year career as a stunt double and a stunt coordinator, and had even worked on the Marvel films with Chris Hemsworth before. And he also did Atomic Blonde. So some of those kind of iconic fight scenes that were in Atomic Blonde, we get to see a lot of that same style. And this film also features an 11-minute oneer which is a fight scene that looks like it has no cuts in it. It's an action thriller. So basically, we start off with this film, and I'm going to give spoilers on this. We start off with this film, and we get to see basically the ending of the movie. We see Chris Hemsworth like totally shot up, and it looks like he's he might be bleeding out, and he's reloading a magazine into his gun, and it looks like he might be, he's alone on this bridge, and this might be the end for him. And then we are introduced to a young boy who turns out to be kind of like, there's kind of an interesting choice there between who is actually the protagonist. I think the boy, you can make an argument that this boy is the protagonist in this film. And we kind of introduce this boy who ends up getting kidnapped, and then enter the Chris Hemsworth character, who is going to be the mercenary who's going to go on an expedition to try to save this boy. And within that, we're pretty much immediately brought into some level of intrigue. And this is, I think, where the movie ultimately could have been a little bit stronger if it actually had. Basically, to be honest, I didn't really even understand what the confusion was with the plot, because he was hired by, it seemed like, there's two rival gangs, and he was hired by one gang to go in there and get the boy back. And then all of a sudden, the caretaker for the boy was actually fighting against Chris Hemsworth. So it sounds like if they just had a little bit better communication, none of this would have happened. But that's irrelevant. We're getting into now some really badass action sequences. And, I personally am not a huge fan of just action alone, but I have to say that they did such a good job with this action. And in particular, with that oneer, with that long, unbroken take, there was a few things that stood out to me that were kind of special. And it's interesting to see that this is a, obviously first-time director, but understanding the language and the structure of fighting. We were able to go through, and it had this kind of almost like a first-person shooter video game feel to it, where we followed first Chris Hemsworth and the boy, and then we started veering off, and we kind of started following one of the other policemen that was going to be actually in conflict with Chris Hemsworth. And then we go through that whole sequence, and then that guy gets killed. And then later on, when we come back to the boy and Chris Hemsworth, there's another sequence where the boy ends up getting pulled away from Chris Hemsworth. And I found it was interesting that even like subconsciously, that there was this kind of sense of, when we had followed someone else away from Chris Hemsworth, they ended up getting killed. And now all of a sudden, there was even like a double kind of sense of dread for this little boy, that obviously this Chris Hemsworth character was really the protector of the boy in this. And when he got pulled away from him, you just thought, oh no, he's totally going to get killed. And, sure enough, he gets saved. But that was a pretty cool sequence, and from there on, the movie really, the pace really kept up. This was about an hour and 50 minutes, and it really moved along quite nicely. And there was a few moments in there. There was a few kind of select things that were done in this film that made it kind of feel a little bit more dramatic weight than these kind of often Hollywood action films, the kind of these 80s style action films, where we meet the character of Chris Hemsworth, and this is, I found it kind of a little bit ridiculous, because he looked like this guy who has a lot of pain, but for some reason he's an alcoholic, which doesn't make sense for how much he's drinking, for how like ripped he is. But that aside, he's this kind of super badass guy who can't really, he's got problems in the real world, but he's an amazing fighter. these kind of old, cliched characters. But the beginning and the end of this movie, there's a couple themes in it with like, the first, you see this in the trailer, you see Chris Hemsworth jump off this huge cliff and then he falls into the water, and then he ends up like holding his breath, like comfortable under the water there. And then later on in the film, him and the boy have a really touching scene where the boy kind of says something along the lines of, the people that you don't drown when you fall into a river, you drown when you stay submerged into it. And that kind of was the overall arc of the movie for that character. And in the end of it, we see the boy jumping into his own swimming pool as he's saved, and then he kind of comes up out of the water. So they did a good job of kind of overall doing this arc in the film, which was nice, because I think, whether or not you are someone who likes drama, and you kind of just wanted to see the action films, I think that stuff kind of has a little bit more of an impact when there's those elements put in there as well. Still action thriller, it's still all about the action and all about the car scenes and all the shoot 'em ups and the explosions and stuff. But it kind of had a little bit of sense of, reminded me of some of the Tony Scott films, which had those big blockbuster elements, but then also had, quality actors, often Denzel Washington. And, there was these big fight scenes and stuff, but ultimately it also had more of an emotional impact. So I would say this is definitely worth your time. It's currently quarantined, so, we're watching a little bit more content, but this is something, if you don't expect too much from it, I would give it a B-. One thing to point out is that, I was curious to see Chris Hemsworth in a little bit of a different role. This is a guy who's like, super cool and like good looking. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of kind of how we felt about Brad Pitt, where, Brad Pitt was always kind of so good looking that it was surprising that he ended up being a really good actor. Somehow along the lines, he kind of turned into that. Or even like Matthew McConaughey kind of did the same thing. That I wouldn't be surprised to see Chris Hemsworth kind of continue to grow on that. He wouldn't really show too much more of that. He had some more emotional scenes in this, and nothing ever felt forced or pushed. But I wonder how much more chops this guy actually has. So I would definitely recommend it. It's worth your time. I'm going to be reviewing a couple more films, so stay tuned, and hope everyone's doing good. I'll talk to you later.